The emergency bay doors burst open at 2:47 a.m., and the sound that followed was one nobody in that trauma unit would ever forget. Captain Marcus Reyes, a decorated Navy SEAL with 14 years of combat experience, was thrashing on the gurney, his roar of pain echoing off the tiled walls. 6 men had carried him in from a training accident gone wrong, and every single doctor who approached him got the same result. He screamed louder, twisted away, and nearly struck one resident across the jaw in his delirium. "Get me vitals now," barked Dr. Whitfield, the attending physician, but Reyes wasn't hearing him. His eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused, fixed on something none of them could see. His hands clawed at the air. His back arched off the table. The monitors beeped an alarm as his heart rate spiked past 180. 2 orderlies tried to hold his shoulders down, and he threw them both off like they weighed nothing. That was when Nurse Elena Cross walked in. She wasn't supposed to be on this case. She'd been reassigned from the ICU to cover a nursing shortage in trauma just 3 days earlier, and this was technically not even her patient. But something about the sound of his voice stopped her cold in the hallway. It wasn't just pain. She'd heard pain before hundreds of times in hundreds of patients. This was different. This was a specific cadence, a rhythm of suffering she recognized from somewhere deep in her own past. She pushed through the curtain, and the first thing she did was something nobody expected. She didn't reach for a syringe. She didn't reach for restraints. She knelt down beside the gurney, brought her face level with his, and spoke to him in a low, steady voice that cut through the chaos like a blade through fog. "Captain, look at me. You're not there anymore. You're in Bethesda. You're safe." The room went quiet. Reyes's wild eyes found hers, and for one suspended second, something in him recognized the words. His chest heaved. His fists unclenched just slightly. "He's not reacting to the injury," Elena said, not looking away from him, her voice pitched for the whole room to hear. "He's reacting to a memory. This isn't standard post-op agony. Look at his breathing pattern, it's tactical breathing, box breathing, broken. He's trying to self-regulate and failing. This is a trauma response layered on top of a physical injury, and if you sedate him hard right now without addressing that, his body is going to fight the drugs and his heart is going to pay the price." Dr. Whitfield stared at her. "How do you know that?" She didn't answer right away. She kept her hand hovering near Reyes's shoulder, not touching, just present, and kept talking to him in that same low cadence. "Captain, I need you to tell me your name, rank, and today's date. Can you do that for me?" It took nearly 10 seconds. 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes to everyone watching. Then, through gritted teeth, barely audible, "Reyes, Captain. August. Good. That's good. Now I need you to tell me where the pain is worst. Not where they told you it should be. Where you actually feel it." His hand, shaking, moved to his lower ribs, not the leg wound the paramedics had flagged as primary. Elena's eyes snapped to the chart, then back to his torso. "Get me an ultrasound, portable now. I think we're missing an internal injury and the leg wound is masking it because it's louder, it's more visible, and it's easier to blame." Whitfield hesitated only a moment before nodding to a tech. The machine rolled in. Elena kept talking to Reyes the entire time, her hand finally resting light as a feather on his forearm, and incredibly, his breathing began to slow. The screaming stopped. What replaced it was worse in some ways. A low, exhausted moan of a man who had been fighting a war inside his own body and was finally being heard. The ultrasound found it within 90 seconds. A splenic laceration, small but actively bleeding, completely missed in the initial triage because every visible sign pointed to the leg. Whitfield's face went pale. If we'd sedated him and sent him to imaging on the standard protocol, he might have bled out in a hallway, Elena finished quietly. Surgery was called immediately. As the team prepped to move him, Reyes's hand shot out and grabbed Elena's wrist, not with panic this time, but with something closer to desperation. "Don't leave," he rasped. "Please. You're the only one who—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Elena looked at Whitfield. He gave a single silent nod. She walked beside the gurney all the way to the operating room doors, her hand never leaving his, murmuring words only he could hear, words that kept his pulse from climbing again, words that no textbook had taught her. As the doors swung shut and she was left standing alone in the hallway, The rest of the staff stared at her with a mixture of confusion and awe. Nobody understood how a reassigned trauma nurse had just saved a Navy SEAL's life in under 4 minutes flat, using nothing but her voice and her instincts. But Elena knew. She knew exactly why she'd understood him. And that secret, the one she'd buried for 11 years, was about to come back to the surface in ways she never expected. If you're feeling the tension already, imagine what happens when Captain Reyes wakes up and starts asking questions about how she knew. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss Chapter 2, where the truth about Elena's past finally comes out, and it changes everything about this case. Captain Reyes woke up 36 hours later in a private recovery room, groggy, sore, and immediately alert to one fact. The woman who had been beside him in his worst moment was sitting in the chair by the window, reading his chart like she had every right to. "You're not supposed to be in here," he said, his voice hoarse but clearer than it had been in the trauma bay. "I switched a shift," Elena said simply, not looking up. "Someone needed to keep an eye on you. Your surgeon's orders, not just mine." He studied her for a long moment. "You knew things about me in there. Things that weren't on any chart." "How?" Elena finally met his eyes, and there was a weight behind hers now that hadn't been visible in the chaos of the trauma bay. She set the chart down slowly. "My husband was a corpsman. Attached to a SEAL platoon, actually, before you were even commissioned. He came home from his last deployment with wounds nobody could see on an X-ray. The doctors kept treating the surface. I watched him scream in his sleep for 2 years before anyone finally listened to what his body was actually telling them." Reyes went very still. He didn't come home from the fight, not really. Not the version of him I married. He's alive. He's just somewhere else now, learning to live with what happened to him. I couldn't reach him in time. Not the way I reached you. So I went back to school. I became a nurse. I promised myself that if I ever stood in a room with someone screaming like that again, I wouldn't just treat the wound they pointed to. I'd listen to the one they couldn't. The room was silent except for the soft beep of the monitor. Reyes looked down at his hands, the same hands that had clawed the air in panic 2 nights ago, and something in his hardened expression cracked open. "I've been in this uniform 14 years, he said quietly. "I've been shot. I've broken bones I didn't feel until days later. But that night, that pain wasn't in my leg. It was in my chest, and it wasn't the spleen. You knew that too, didn't you?" Elena nodded slowly. "Tactical breathing gone wrong isn't caused by a leg wound, Captain. It's caused by something your mind is still fighting. The bleed I found was real, and it would have killed you. But it wasn't the reason you were screaming. It was the reason your body finally let you scream at all." Reyes was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its command edge entirely. "There was a mission 18 months ago. I lost 2 men under my direct order. I've never said that out loud to anyone. Not my CO, not my wife, not a single psyche val I've faked my way through since. I don't know why I told you in that trauma bay. I don't even remember deciding to." "You didn't decide to," Elena said gently. "Your body decided for you. It had been holding that weight so long it turned into physical pain, because that was the only language you'd let it speak. That's not weakness, Captain. That's a warning system that finally worked." Over the following days, something shifted in that recovery room that neither of them fully planned. Elena checked on him during her rounds, then during her off hours, then simply because she wanted to. Reyes started talking, really talking, about the mission, about his guilt, about the anger he'd been burying under discipline and command presence for a year and a half. She didn't try to fix him. She'd learned the hard way that broken men can't be fixed by force. She just refused to let him go through it in silence the way her husband once had. On the day of his discharge, Reyes stood at the doors of the hospital, duffel bag over his shoulder, steadier on his feet than he'd been in longer than he could remember. He turned to Elena, who had come down specifically to see him off, against every professional instinct telling her not to get attached to patients. "I want to see a counselor," he said. "A real one. Not the box-checking kind. Because of what you said. Because you didn't let me hide behind the leg wound." Elena smiled, and for the first time since her husband's diagnosis years ago, it reached her eyes completely. "That's the strongest thing I've ever heard a SEAL say." "There's something else," Reyes added, hesitating in a way that seemed foreign to a man used to giving. Orders under fire. I'd like to stay in touch. Not as a patient. As someone who owes you his life twice over. Once for the surgery and once for actually listening. She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't walk away either. And as he disappeared through the hospital doors into the daylight, Elena stood there for a long moment, thinking about her husband, about the years she couldn't save him from his own silence, and about the strange, aching gift of finally being able to save someone else. Word spread through the hospital fast. The trauma nurse who diagnosed what an entire team of doctors missed, using nothing but instinct, empathy, and a wound of her own she'd never spoken about. Some called it luck. The people who'd been in that room that night called it something closer to a miracle. This story is a reminder that the deepest wounds are rarely the ones we can see, and that sometimes it takes someone who has lived through the same silent battle to finally break through. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, because we have so many more powerful stories like this one coming your way, and you will not want to miss a single one. Turn on notifications, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and we'll see you in the next story.